Welcome to today's episode of the Capstone Conversation. And as a unique thing, we have two podcasts in one. I'm joined by a good friend and host of his own podcast,
Josh Broward. I'm host of Founder Real Talk.
and we're going to be both interviewing each other, both sharing this podcast. And so we're going to give it a try and I think be a little bit creative in how we approach this. But we are going to be talking about how startups interact in the government space. We're going to address founder questions. We're going to address GovTech solutions in the ever-changing market. And we're going to go from there. For my listeners that know me fairly well, I'll introduce myself to Josh's audience. I am a consultant that helps cities with economic development, and I help private companies with both land use and selling GovTech solutions into state and local government throughout the whole country with a focus on Northern California. Josh?
I run Wisdom Partners, which is a leadership coaching company. We mostly serve startup founders, and we help them evolve as leaders so they can keep growing their company as the company grows. Often startups end up getting stalled as the company starts to exceed the founder's leader capacity.
And part of what we're going to talk about today along those lines is how do startups working with government scale? How can they raise venture capital? How do they embrace change in government, which is slow to embrace change, and be innovative and true to yourself? That's what we're going to be talking about. Josh, do you want to allude a little bit more to your background and expertise in this?
Sure. Thanks, Jared. My background is pretty varied. I've done nonprofit community development, for-profit consulting, and worked in Kaiser Permanente as a strategy consultant. I also have a PhD in organizational leadership with a specific focus in leader development. And so that's really the genesis of starting Wisdom Partners. One of my oldest friends, I've known him longer than I've known my wife, sold companies to Apple and Facebook, and we realized there's a real gap in the developmental process for startup founders. And so we wanted to bring some of our experience and skills and education to bear to make the growth process easier for startup founders.
And I think that's important because with the GovTech's been around for a long time. I've worked with IBM and Cisco Systems and Verizon in the space over the years and startups you've never heard of, but it's scaling at a much higher rate right now. And every founder of a GovTech startup believes that they have the best invention since Facebook or Google, and everybody should buy this. And even if they do, what you need to understand is how to work with government, how to sell, and how to build long-term companies' sustainability and culture.
I think, especially in the GovTech space, this is true. Nobody cares about your product. Nobody cares about the cool features you took forever building, and nobody cares about your UX, UI. They just don't care. What they care about is, can you solve their problems? And in the GovTech space, mostly what they care about is, can you solve them money without getting them in trouble? Can you solve money without disrupting the systems that matter?
And I use the old, probably 1990s adage in government is that you are safe if you hire IBM for work. And they are still out there, but they are not what they once were. They were the big powerhouse. And it's a lot for government to take chances. That's what that means, right? They are safe hiring the big, strong, stable entity that would be around for the next generation. Startups are a harder bet.
No government leader wants to invest a lot of time and money making a transition to a technology that suddenly doesn't exist. because the startup went under, which
Or
is,
let's look at that. Let's talk about how a company gets their first deal. They have this great idea. They have the software for it. Let's look at how you get your first government deal. Josh, what would you tell them?
here's my friend Jared, who helps startups get government deals.
Now you know I am interviewing him.
But
I was talking to two people, very credible, know the space that they're in the transportation asset management space. And I think they have a great case. I know they could do this. I know they can run the business. What they're missing is several pilots. And they were like, hey, how do we achieve those pilots to do what we want? And I was just talking, give it away. And I know that's hard. I know there's investment. I know they actually have hardware in terms of to go with the software. And I was like, just need 3 partners. Give this to them if they are willing to do this with you and they are willing to become case studies. But don't give it to anybody. De-risk this for them. Ask them what their problem is. And if you could hone in on what their key problem is, great, let's do that. Let's figure out how to adopt that. And I think that's important because then you will build case studies and people who will testify. I have a client that is working on a project for a city in Washington State. What we did, instead of them submitting a case study to the Washington State Association of Cities, or what is in California, the League of Cities, we worked with the city to submit that and bring our client in and a subcontractor of theirs as partners in the project to create a panel. And now, because we're 18 months into it, we have some data that we can share with all of those other cities, been part of this as a partner the whole time.
that's great. I would just add two little things. One is, if you do a free pilot, there should be a schedule at which, like an expected time that if certain metrics are met, they will become a paying customer, even if it's at a discounted rate. But as much as possible, you want to remove the possibility of, we're going to try this for free and we don't really care if it works or not, or we're not invested in the process, we're not committed to using this, we're just piddling because it's free. And so you want to try to have clear expectations of, if we do this, then you will pay us here. And you make sure, who are the people who have to approve the payment here? Okay, let's get them involved and make sure they're signing on for the pilot. And then another thing I would add, you may not be able to do this on your first 1 or 2 deals, but pretty quickly you can do an alternative version of a pilot we call conditional contracts. And so the idea is, hopefully they'll pay a certain amount setup fee. Then you agree together what are the metrics that would make this a pretty good success and a blow it out of the water success. And then you have, just say, for example, the setup is $10,000. And then the pretty good success is another $20,000. And then the blow it out of the water is $50,000. They better be getting $100,000, $200,000 in value if they're going to pay you $50,000. But if they get $200,000 in value, they're probably going to be really happy to pay you the $50,000. And so that's how you set it up at the beginning, is like, what metrics would we have to hit for you to be really happy to pay us? And then you have a couple of standards, and that reduces the risk for them of working with an unproven startup. But it also reduces the risk for you as the founder of like putting in a lot of work and not getting anything out of it. Would that work with the government folks that you work with?
I think that's important. And just going back to that example that I was saying with getting the pilot programs for the hardware, I do believe we will have one of the 3 will pay for the hardware costs, which is only like 8 or 9,000, right? That's a big deal
Right.
pocket and your day job for that money. I think key here, Josh, is cities need to de-risk this, right? If you're going to be possibly, if you're at their first or even your 50th case, if you're on venture funding, they don't know that you're going to be around and not acquired or not bankrupt. And so you have to de-risk that strategy.
In some ways, selling to the government is similar to selling anywhere. It's just all of the problems are magnified. Like, it becomes really important to have an internal champion, somebody who is going to be your interpreter and help you understand how decisions actually get made in this particular government. Sometimes it's a council, sometimes it's an administrator. There are all kinds of different gatekeepers. And the person you're talking to probably isn't the gatekeeper, the true decision maker. And so it's important to find out how stuff actually gets bought and done and implemented in that context, because a city will be different from a county, a town will be different from a city. All of that kind of stuff it's hyper local. And so it's almost like you have to consider it a cross-cultural experience. And then you have to, whoever your internal champion is, you have to really empower them with the tools so that they can talk about your company when you're not in the room and they're still accurate. And they're still talking about it in ways that truly describes the value add for the organization.
One of the questions that I want to ask is there's this seed, A round, D round. I want to ask, when do you think a GovTech can go out past that bootstraps and raise money?
I was trying to decide how much history I want to give, but I will skip the history and just define the terms. Pre-seed, also, you might include angels in this. Sometimes people will even talk about a separate angel round or friends and family round. And that is when individuals are writing relatively small checks or making relatively small investments. Could be as little as 5,000 up to 50 or 100,000 in the company. And then a pre-seed round is sometimes a combination of angels and institutional investors, VCs, venture capitalists. And that round is usually between 500,000 and 5 million, depending on the environment, but often it's between 500K and 1.5 million for a pre-seed round. Then, and so at pre-seed, usually what happens is they have an MVP, they have a basic idea, a minimum viable product, they have something that is being tested in the market. Not always, but usually they have something, they have the core of the technology that is usable. These days, often they have customers already. And then in the seed round, most of the time these days, they're doing real customer. They have real customers, they have real revenue. Often it's 100 to 500K annual revenue for the seed round. And they're often raising between $2 and $5 million. It can get bigger, especially with AI now. An A round is where it's all institutional. It's all VCs, it's all serious money. Those can range from 10 to $100 million, more likely between 10 and 30 or 40. And then they just keep going B, C, D, E. They get bigger and bigger as you go on the way to an IPO. One way to think about it in general is, I think the average is every round the founders are giving away, or the investors are buying, somewhere around 15% of the company. As the company grows, the amount of money it takes to buy 15% of the company is much larger because the company's worth much more. But in a pre-seed round, you can buy 15% of the company for $500,000 to $1 million often.
And I liked how you shared that with revenue projections, because I think that will help startup founders understand it's not necessarily based on how many clients, it's based on the revenue from those clients that leads you to the next round. That's what I understood,
Yeah,
right?
and how repeatable it is. If it's a one-time sale, that's less valuable. If it's subscription sales or like contracts over time, that's more valuable. And of course, GovTech, the benefit is it tends to be super hard to sell, but super sticky. Once you get a customer, they're generally locked in. They don't leave you because, as you said earlier, governments don't like change in general. That works against you first, and then if you beat the inertia, then it works for you.
Let's focus on that aspect, right? What is the scaling aspect that a company should pay attention to? They have 3, 5, 10 clients. They have that recurring revenue, $500,000 plus a year, let's just say now. What are the next steps? How do they then say, okay, we're going to get the next 30 clients? Let's talk through some of that.
Anytime do we want to talk about raising or do we want to talk about second tier selling? Because they're kind of different questions.
Tackle one and then tackle the other for you. This is where I can edit anything.
Well, let's talk getting customers first, because the real thing is if you get customers, investors will follow. Like one of two, if you're great at getting customers, one of two things is going to happen. Either you sell so much that you don't need more investment, or you sell so much people are like almost begging you to take their money because they want a ride on this rocket ship. Customers rule the startup. Revenue is king. I think the scenario you said is they have $500,000 to $1 million in annual revenue. They have 30-ish, 30 to 50 customers. How do they go beyond that? I think I would approach that into two ways. The first thing I would do is I would look at the 30 customers we have, and I would basically become a student of our customer acquisition process. Who are they? How did they find out about us? What are we, assuming we're in GovTech here, are we resonating most with city governments or county governments or state representatives? Are we resonating with a particular size of city? Maybe in the 50 to 100,000 population, or maybe it's actually more about city budget than it is about the number of people. Maybe the people who are buying our stuff are upper middle class cities in the suburbs. Whatever that is, I would try to understand who are early, if there's an early customer profile, and there might be a few, but when you're making your next step out, that is probably the group, that is probably the people who already bought from you are going to be the easiest to target, because they're friends with the people who bought from you, and the people who bought from you are good proof cases, because one city of 100,000 will look at another city of 100,000 and say, oh, this worked for them. I can see how it would work for us. I think that's the first thing.
I actually was just, when I was at the car wash earlier today, I was talking to a police officer, and he was from Concord, and we were just talking like, what's the difference between being a police officer in Concord versus Oakland versus Moraga or Livermore, just the difference in the type of dynamics in the city and the expectations of the officer. And the same thing happens here. If you try to be something to everybody, that doesn't work, right? Most earlier stage GovTech companies have a lot of trouble creating what is their avatar. Who is their ideal city? What is repeatable? If you are doing great among X city with these demographics that Josh is talking about, go after that. If it's a city that's having, hey, we have a budget problem and a hiring freeze, and they're adopting this to make the current people more efficient, those are repeatable patterns that I can help clients research and identify and target them.
And also, as much as you can, if you have 30 customers, that's actually kind of a pretty good data set And so go back and study and ask them, how did you guys make this decision? If you're selling to police, was it actually the police union who advocated for this? Or was it somebody in a government safety office? Or who was the champion? And what you're looking for patterns, because once you discern the pattern of how you find your champion or who promotes you, then you can go target those people and you can accelerate your success process, because now you know this is the profile. This is the profile of the city, and this is the profile of the individual in the city or connected to the city who is most likely to advocate on our behalf.
Oh, I think that's a great point. And understanding who that internal champion is, being able to find them and communicate to them, that's important. I would also say on scale, so many of my clients, especially some that come from overseas, they all want to go to LA and New York. Why? Because those are the biggest, right? But if that deal is going to take me $10,000 a month and 2 years to do, but if in the meantime, I can spend that same $10,000 a month and within a year have 11 clients for you, are we better off going with that strategy than the strategy that just puts all our eggs in that one basket? And I'll give another example, is a public safety startup I had been working with. And I kept finding them good potential targets that were in the 50 to 60 employee range for that public safety organization. And this company's, no, we want to go to 100 to 250 in size. And I said, okay, I get that. But are you better off with 10 case studies from early adopters who are willing to bet on your technology versus the procurement process, the long time that those others are going to make you go through?
We often tell startup founders, if you go fishing for a whale, you're more likely to starve than to catch a whale, because it takes so long and the whales just are not interested in anything you have to offer. It's a much more sustainable pathway to start with minnows, figure out how to consistently catch minnows, then move up to trout, then move up to tuna, and work your way up the food chain. And the first time you catch a tuna, you'll be like, this is amazing. Keep catching your trout and you celebrate when you get a tuna. But eventually you'll figure out how you get tuna on a regular basis. And then you can move up to sharks or marlins or whatever the next biggest fish is. But it's a very common mistake for people to target a customer that's too big for the stage that they're at now. And whether that's enterprise or GovTech, like, it's super common. And the thing is, if you landed a whale, you wouldn't be able to service them anyway. Like, your people trying to land LA, like, they probably couldn't handle LA. You need to start with much smaller and lower risk. And those people you can work out your kinks in the smaller systems. Does that kind of hold true in the GovTech space too?
I think that's true, because I'm not saying you can't get a big fish, but sometimes I scale with a client. I got them a small deal with a county parks department, and we couldn't get the whole county. That was too big of a lift, but we found a specific need, a specific use within that county parks department. From there, within the county parks, said, wait, we see how this can be used for a second use case within our department. It took 18 months, but in 18 months, we're now having serious discussions with the county about a full-scale program.
Nice.
But it was 18 months you had a paying client. You were able to reference that client to every city within that county, every county. It was a pin on the map, as I say, and that's so important. Even within San Francisco, for that same client, we got a very small 6-month contract for a very specific use case, but now San Francisco's a client. You do it and how you tell that story. But if we were going after that county or San Francisco, It's going to take 5 years to still scale San Francisco for that.
And your other people you're trying to sell to, you don't have to tell them, and they don't really care that it was the county parks department and a $7,000 deal total. You can just say, we're working with county such and such, with such and such county. And it's, oh, okay. Now you're a serious player. Let me listen a little more closely. It's not dishonest. You just don't have to tell everything. You're serving this customer.
And you're building your business, which also matters for capital raising, which also matters against potential competition and other items.
Yep, that's right.
Okay, Josh, I've been doing the asking. Turn anything around on?
I think what I want to know is, why is selling to governments different from selling to businesses? Why and how?
I would say there's an accountability process and a risk-taking limited philosophy that's there. So what do I mean by that? Anytime you do something with government, it's transparency, right? Did you get the best price? Did you take a risk that you shouldn't have taken? How do we benchmark and measure that? Because your citizens are your taxpayers. If somebody screws up on a recall of Ford, yes, you get hit at Ford or Toyota on a recall, and maybe that affects your stock prices. Maybe it doesn't, depending on the size of it. But in government, that pressure from the voters leads to recalls. It leads to election losses. It leads to a lot of headaches, because you might not be able to reach the CEO or the chairman of the board of an automotive company, but you can of your local city, of your local county. And that relationships are important. One of the problems that San Francisco had that led to the fires is that the mayor at the time, later arrested, was illegally taking bribes that were supposed to go to water infrastructure. And that infrastructure never got built. And so there's decades of cases like that within government, and that has led to serious procurement regulations that the mayor can't go and give a contract to their brother-in-law or their golfing buddy or all of this. It has to be vetted through staff. But saying all of that within that process of government that could extend the timeline for any sale, you have relationships. And if you go back to our Procurement 101 episode from early April, they were talking relationships matter because you want to have trust, especially for the startups, trust with your local government entity that you will be there to be that partner. It's that value, Josh, you were talking about. Hey, if you want to get a $50,000 contract, you better deliver $200,000 in service, right? That will lead to them trusting you and singing your praises and expansion beyond all belief. And so I got to say, relationships are part of it, but it's transparency, accountability, and risk aversion that you see in government.
How often do you see your clients making nearby sales? You talked about the land and expand with a county park system. Great. But how often do you see one suburb becoming a customer and then the next suburb over also becoming a customer because it worked for these guys?
Oh, very often. And in fact, I'm working with a company that catches microplastics from wastewater treatment facilities. And they had their first client in southern New Jersey, and through a grant, they happened to get another client here in the Bay Area. And they were asking me about this place on the Gulf Coast and this place. And I was like, we're going to focus on 10 facilities in a 30-mile radius of each of your two deals. Those because of two reasons. One, you can go and see it physically, in that case of the microplastics company, at the wastewater facilities. They could see the local press. But most important, they have that relationship. Even if this person at a different wastewater treatment facility near San Jose doesn't know what Richmond or Burlingame or those people are, there's like a trust that integral web. They all experience the same problem going into the Bay. And so it is so important to stay locally. And I have some tech clients where we say, okay, somewhere in the Midwest that we determine makes sense. And then either Florida, within Florida and Texas, like California, we have to break down the region to, okay, we're going to the East Bay. We're going to LA County, not Orange County. And why? Because you have limited bandwidth and why do I take somebody to 3 states like that once they have the appropriate bandwidth? Because that helps build credibility. In Texas, Missouri, and California, or Alabama or Michigan or something like that, helps you then say, okay, it's not just, but keep drawing circles until you max out each of those states before you move on to the next state.
And I think that's so applicable, not just in the GovTech space, but in lots of business contexts. People try to be a mile wide and an inch deep. And it's much healthier from a business perspective to be a mile deep and an inch wide and just really pound the market where you're already winning and expand incrementally where you're already winning. I understand what you're talking about. Sometimes you need to make a beachhead in a totally new market, but not 7 new beachheads all at once. It's just really hard to overcome the noise if you're too diluted. That makes sense. What's the best way for founders to actually find people in governments who can talk to them, who will talk to them? And maybe, I don't even know, maybe they don't need to start with a decision maker. Maybe the decision process is so complex that don't even worry about that right now. Just try to get a champion. What have you found is the best way to get the conversation started? Because if you want to work with a city in the software space, you want to work with a city, they're going to say, oh, okay, talk to our chief information officer. And that's often the completely wrong person because they don't care about it's not whatever problem you have, you're solving, they don't actually care about it. How does founders figure out the right person to talk to in governments?
I think like most sales, it's relationship based. And you've got to show up. And it goes back to those why you stay in, right? With those, because those people talk to each other. They will see each other. They do have friends in these other cities. And I do think IT directors, not all, most of them are there to make sure you can always access your email and the cities don't get hacked. They're the person who's going to implement something, but if this is a public works project, who's managing that? If it's curb management, who's managing your curbs for the city? That's the person who's going to be your champion. He had, as a result of going to that conference and the public announcement, 17,000 emails, text messages, or other things. It became so overwhelmed with people, even multiple salespeople at the same company trying to sell to him. He was like, oh my God, I can't even do my job because I can't even delete all of these fast enough. And then I said, what is your biggest need coming in as chief, and what technology do you think can help you? And he's, oh, I'll tell you this. If you can have somebody who could do X and Y, I am totally into it and we'll take a meeting. Why? Because he has a relationship with me. And it's not bombarded by AI written emails and auto calls and cold callers that you're hiring that are 20. It really is just about building that relationship and utilizing that and finding the right person internally.
We often work with founders on their own inside world as a founder and with the team and the kind of the organizational structure, the team dynamics and the structure that enables companies to grow. I'm curious, what do you see as some of the gaps or frustrations that founders have whether it's in their own leadership or in their teams.
I can talk about from the government client's perspective, what are their concerns is the point of contact. Josh sold me this. Josh is the founder of the company. We're piloting this with him. Now he's assigned me, he's got our deal. He's moved on to the next startup deal. I've got a client service manager that they've just brought on who doesn't know who I am and what we've been talking about in the past. Okay, now I have somebody in IT talking to me. Now that person's been promoted and has a different geography. And I have heard from some government users, this is after they've had the sale, that within 2 to 3 years of a startup, they can have 5 and even sometimes more people that they are interacting with. And that's fine. They get that there's growth within a company. But if that founder made that sale, if they utilized and built that relationship, they should check in with them and say, how's it going? What do you need? And so often that it is just frustrating for them. It's the same way if your company gets acquired or goes out of business because this person has no idea why you originally became their first client or their fifth client.
With governments, perhaps more than within the business world, it's really important to maintain the human relational connection, which I think probably is surprising to people who are outside government because they think of government as being like a machine. But what I think one of the key insights I'm hearing from you is governments are deeply human and deeply relational. They're not they're intensely personal, even though they're like often the oldest institution in the area.
And I want to say relationships are important and they lead to success, but it's not everything too, right? And you have to know how to sell through that process to government. But sometimes I consider a win if I get a quick no, I have absolutely no interest in this whatsoever. I think that's a win for the client. They don't see it that way. But I remember a couple of years ago, I was working for a company that had solutions for traffic management. And they were talking to one of the bigger cities in the area and about how this was, 7 or 8 meetings with the target is great. They were talking to a 3rd level down planner who was fascinated with the technology. And they were bringing in some other colleagues. But what they weren't doing was asking, do you ever have a budget for this? What would your timeline to buy this be? Because that research, that part of the process was eluding them. And I reached out to the city manager and to the mayor of that town. And they said, is this about public safety? No. This is about traffic management. No, we're not interested. Right now, we're not going to put additional budget towards that. Our issue is this next 2 to 4 years is a public safety. We're addressing a public safety problem. So you have to mix human intelligence and relationships with people you're talking to.
I know we're going to run out of time, but we would be remiss if we didn't talk about Startup Walnut Creek.
Josh, first, what is Startup Walnut Creek? Hit us.
Startup Walnut Creek is a collection of people from different organizations and city or quasi-city bodies working to make Walnut Creek a hub for innovation through startups in the East Bay, and particularly focused on sports and health tech. It started with a couple of events, and now it's blossoming into more and more frequent and bigger events. And we're hoping it will add a couple of other pillars, helping startups connect with enterprises, with basically helping startups get these genuine customers, and then also connecting with investors. And we want there to be an investment arm. We're still not sure exactly how that will look.
Josh and I got to know each other really well. There's a lot of other people involved with this effort. And we're announcing in October, we are going to have a large-scale event in partnership with the Shadeland Sports Mall and Northeastern University St. Mary's College of California, and a couple of healthcare providers where we're going to host a big health tech, sport tech competition. Give prize money to companies, learn about the space. It's very different than the GovTech I do, which is part of why I love it, but we are attracting businesses in the health tech and sport tech space to partner here. Not only are we looking to give them 10,000, 25,000, and eventually even bigger checks, but we are looking to partner them with sports labs, with healthcare providers. The Band of Angels is a partner. They'll agree to anybody who comes through our competition. They can't agree to fund them because that's up to individuals, but they will help walk you through their interview process, right? We're trying to give you, if you can walk away with Kaiser or Sutter or UCSF Children's Spending Hospital and the Copa Soccer, if you can walk away with, Josh, you coach startups. What is the value of those partnerships and those pilot programs?
And we're talking about customers and revenue is king. The reason why I'm excited about Startup Walnut Creek is I want to get startups to help them bridge the gap to genuine customers, especially in the enterprise space. And Walnut Creek has several real players in the enterprise space and a ton of players in the mid-market space. It is a game changer to be able to talk to actual decision makers in big organizations. And what we're really trying to do is leverage this group of people who care about one geographic area and connect them with startups who can solve the problems that they really need solved and create a symbiotic relationship there.
And I like it from an economic development standpoint, right? Because what we're doing is we assessed what is the strength of the market locally. Where are they strong that differs them from anybody else? Instead of just saying we want more doctors or we want more tech, we really focused it on this health tech and sport tech side. And we're playing off of relationships that already exist in the market.
I think that is a repeatable playbook other areas can do, whether it's space tech or ag tech or ed tech, whatever the area is that where you have some specialty or some special access, that is pretty cool. And I think one of the things Walnut Creek has going for it is it's a relatively short drive or a subway trip to San Francisco, but cheaper, much cheaper. And also you can be out of the city vibe, but still in an innovative, dynamic area. And so I think that's a cool thing that as remote and hybrid work becomes more common. I think I'm seeing it, a lot of tech companies, the founders don't live in the city. They live somewhere in the satellite metro area and come to the city for networking and to raise money and that kind of stuff. And I think that trend will probably increase. And you'll have people not only living in other places, but setting up their offices outside the major city proper, in our case, outside of San Francisco or San Jose, and setting up office in these further reaches that are still within reach of the big action.
And I can't talk about the partnerships enough. If you come here, you will meet people in your field. You will be able to, if you have a credible product or an idea in this space, you will be able to talk to major institutions that are on board and looking proactively for new tech in the new ideas to do injury prevention to speed up the process. Why does a university want in on this? Because they see the future, right? And they want to teach coaches how to embrace new tech. They want to teach med students and doctors how to do this. They want to support their entrepreneurial with these local businesses that are leading the world.
It's a lot of fun. Well, stay tuned. We'll have some big announcements coming out this summer about some pretty cool stuff this fall.
Josh, how do people learn more about you?
Wisdompartners.llc. That's our website. You can also find me on LinkedIn. Josh Broward.
Asch on LinkedIn, and ASCH and Capstone Government Affairs. You could find us on the web. Thanks, Josh.
Thanks, Jared. This is fun.